Hello and welcome to a new edition of True Audio Files. Today I'm going to do a sound quality shootout of Warren Zevon's Excitable Boy. And what sparked this is the fact that Mobile Fidelity came out with a 45 RPM version of it. It came out a couple weeks ago, but I didn't get it until the beginning of this week. But this is the Mobile Fidelity 45 RPM version. I got number 637. And this is just like all the other ones recently where they've made a digital copy of the master tape and then cut it to vinyl, and then also created a an SACD and CD version of the recording to release. And I've got a couple of other variations that I wanted to go with to demo and shoot out versus that one. So the first one I've got here is a white label promo of, so basically a first pressing, and I'll show you here that it is indeed a white label promo, as you could see. So white label promo, US pressing. Not sure who cut it. I didn't really investigate too hard, but I didn't see any credits for the cutting on here anywhere, which you rarely saw back in the day anyways. So anyway, white label promo version. And then for good measure, I also have a reissue that came out, I don't remember, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more, but it's a glow-in-the-dark version. Actually, though, the impressive thing about it is not that it's glow-in-the-dark, but it was actually cut by Chris Bellman, so it was a pretty respectable reissue here that was done. And I really wanted to get a sense for, which one sounded the best. I had very little expectation of the glow-in-the-dark one, just because, as a kind of a preface, I knew ahead of time, because I had listened to it a few years ago, is that it was really noisy, because unfortunately glow-in-the-dark vinyl tends to be very noisy. And this one was no exception to that rule. So, I mean, that was the one disappointment to that one. But I just wanted to get a sense to see if the actual mastering sounded good or not, too. So, that being said, I started off how I normally do these things is when I get a new reissue, like, for example, the Mobile Fidelity one, what I will do is I will listen to that whole one all the way through, kind of determine, what songs I think would be the best to demo, and do an A-B comparison, and we'll pick a couple and decide to go to those two or three to kind of A-B back and forth between all the different various copies that I have. In this particular case, I kind of went with the standards. Hindsight, I think I probably should have went with the actual title track, Excitable Boy, but I went with Werewolves in London and Lawyers, Guns, and Money, the two most popular tracks that are on this release. So that's what I went with. And basically, when I listened to the Mobile Fidelity one, it sounded great as usual, had good sound stage, had a decent depth, not spectacular depth, but a decent depth. Seemed like a relatively neutral EQ, which is pretty synonymous with them. It had good low end, not too much in my opinion. Good high end, again, not too much in my opinion. And a good amount of mid-range. And that seemed to be the case. I mean, the one thing that I did notice about this album, which sometimes it isn't the case, but the case on this one is the balance between all the different tracks in terms of how they sounded all were pretty similar. So there wasn't a big fluctuation between tracks, where sometimes, like one prime example, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, the actual title track has a pretty significantly different sound to the rest of the album. So that can happen, and especially if there's a track where they think that it's going to be the breakout hit, it sometimes gets a little bit of a preferential treatment in terms of how it's mixed, maybe mixed more for radio, things on that nature. Also, obviously, things that can come into play is if it was recorded in several different studios by several different engineers. No matter what you do to the mix, you're still going to have some variances no matter what you do. But anyways, this one seemed to be pretty well balanced. No matter what track you played, they all had a similar feel and sound to them. So there really wasn't much of a variation. So I could have really picked any song on here, and it would have given me a good ability to check the differences between the different pressings. So anyway, so that was the Mobile Fidelity. Sounded pretty good, pretty even, pretty typical of what I would expect from a Mobile Fidelity. It was on a 45 RPM, so the background noise was a little noisier than I'd like, but it was not by any means bad. So then I moved to the promo copy, the white label promo copy. And the one thing I noticed off the bat is it seemed to have a little tiny bit of a scoop out in the mid-range, especially kind of lower mid-range, but it also, in turn, I kind of personally prefer that. It just seems to make it feel like it's more open, even though it probably isn't, because when I really tried to concentrate on soundstage depth and width and things like that, I found very, very little difference between the promo copy and the Mobile Fidelity. There may have been a little bit of a, what would be classified maybe as air between the instruments and vocals and all that stuff on the Mobile Fidelity in comparison to the original, but it was super minor. It's really something that may not even be there. It may have been just more of a perception in my head that made me think that. So, but anyway, so I listened to that. They have a very similar soundstage, in both in terms of width and in depth, and they had, both had great bass. The bass drum felt like it may have been a little bit deeper on the promo copy, but that may have just been because the lower mid-range was a little bit more pronounced on the Mobile Fidelity. So it's hard for me to really say with certainty, but it definitely gave the impression that there was deeper bass on the bass drum specifically. And so overall, I thought they were both very, very good. If I were to nitpick, I would, like I said, I probably, just because of personal preferences, I'm not really sure it's going to be that case with everybody, is that because of the little bit of what appeared to be a scoop out in the lower mid-range area, I had the preference to that sound, but both were very good. So then again, I went into the glow-in-the-dark pressing, which again, I had low expectations of, because before I actually took it out and put it onto my turntable, I was not aware that Chris Bellman had cut this, and I didn't realize it until I put it actually on the turntable and I saw the little CB on there. So I kind of had some excitement about it in terms of, well, maybe this will actually be a really good pressing. And it was. It sounds really good. I would say it probably lands somewhere in between the Mobile Fidelity and the white label promo when it comes to the mid-range. Probably a little bit more than the white label promo, but not quite as much as the Mobile Fidelity. And had great soundstage, had good separation, and I would say it probably, again, this might be in my head, but it seemed like it may have had the similar space between the instruments and things like that as the Mobile Fidelity did. The one big drawback to it, though, is that it was very noisy, so that could, take away from some of this stuff being able to be picked up as easily. But it sounded really, really good. So my take on this overall is, I think you can still get early pressings or first pressings for super cheap. I paid $8 for that white label promo, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe it's up to $10 or $12 or $15 now. I don't know. I haven't looked it up, quite frankly, but that's going to be your cheapest copy of this right now, because the glow-in-the-dark version, maybe they have a non-glow-in-the-dark version, and I hope they do, because that would be a really great thing for people who want to get a high-fidelity reissue, but maybe can't find a first pressing, and they don't want to spend the money on the Mobile Fidelity. Because I think that costs somewhere around $25 or so. Maybe it goes for $30 nowadays with the inflation pricing, but maybe you can find a black version of the Chris Bellman cut for under $30, which is about half the cost of the Mobile Fidelity. And I think you'd be very, very happy with it. I think that it rivals the Mobile Fidelity. And as if you know anything about me and my channel, I almost always prefer the Mobile Fidelity stuff over any of the other stuff, especially the newer Mobile Fidelity stuff, because I've often found that they have, just that better separation of instruments and the better equalization and all that stuff. But I found it to be not much different, and probably add a slight preference to the early pressing and maybe even the Chris Bellman one. It's probably a very, 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 very close third. I don't think you're going to be unhappy with it if you've already ordered that Mobile Fidelity version, though, because it is very good. But the 45 RPM really didn't do much for it, in my opinion. But it sounds great. And if you've already, like I said, if you've already purchased it, I think you'll be happy if you haven't gotten it yet. And I wouldn't worry about going after any of these other versions unless you just happen to find one. But and maybe you're different. Maybe you prefer that mid-range that the Mobile Fidelity has that the other two didn't. But just giving my take on it, letting you know that these are the differences and what my preference is, but maybe your preferences will be different. But that's everything I have. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to my channel if you liked what you saw here. Hit that alert bell if you want to know when my new stuff comes out. And you can check me out on my social media links that are in the description. So that is everything I have for this week. Thank you if you're a subscriber. Thank you for watching, especially if you're watching to the end here. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thanks a lot.